Every now and again, I'll have something I would call a watershed moment when I make a realization so powerful that it basically changes the way I look at everything. I make realizations all the time, but oftentimes they'll fade into my subconscious after a while, or I'll need to make some concerted effort to keep them in my frame of mind. But on my birthday, I came to a powerful realization that's really changing the way I look at things. It explains why historically I've had such a hard time staying in the present moment. My filter is on backwards. Let's get into it. Okay. So, to really try to convey the gravity of this realization, I think it's important to really explain how meaningful this realization is to me. For me, my frame of mind is really integral to how I feel about a present moment or my course of action. It's really easy for me to get hung up on small details that can really take me out of whatever I'm doing. I'm also the type of person that prioritizes thinking about the negatives of something before the positives. When you put these two things together, it can become very difficult to appreciate or even enjoy whatever it is I'm doing at the present moment. So, to cognitively realize that I have this filter, that I have a propensity to look at the negative over the positive, is really groundbreaking for me. It's offering the opportunity to have a huge paradigm shift in how I look at and participate in life itself. And by prioritizing negatives over the positives, I mean, I actually think of the positive things about a situation first and then the negative. I have two very specific examples that I think really articulate this point and can give some insight to how big of a shift this is going to be for me. Okay. So I've come up with a very high quality picture to really demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So I've spent a lot of time coming up with this, obviously super high quality graphics, but this is kind of how I go through experiencing things. I'll have an experience, so I'll, think about a present moment. And here at this beginning part, I'm thinking about the widest range of things. And here is where I've traditionally thought about positive things. It's like, oh, I'm having a good time. And then as it gets closer to me, I start to more focus on the negatives of something. And by the time my thought process gets to here, my viewpoint is looking at that experience through a negative lens. One of the examples that I want to bring up here is that on my birthday, I went to a botanical garden. It was a great experience. Being able to go around and just appreciate nature is always very calming for me. And it was a pretty hot day out. And I was looking around at the trees and I thought, like this is a great time, but like I'm it's really hot out here. And I came to a realization. I was with someone and was talking to them about it. And I was like, I'm appreciating this moment over how hot it is. I feel like I'm looking at this backwards. Like normally I will look at a situation and be like, I'm having a good time, but I'm really hot. So I'm not having as good a time as I otherwise would. However, if I do that backwards, it's really hot, but I'm having a good time. I look at the experience entirely differently. And the person told me, like, oh, I always look at it like that. I always look at the negatives first and then the positives. And I was like, I guess my filter has just been on backwards. I haven't really thought about it like that. And I have been thinking about it a lot since. And I think this picture really articulates kind of what I'm conveying here. Whatever positives of a situation start to fade into the distance when I look at them first and then look at the negatives afterwards. These gray lines are kind of, demonstrating the idea that I have something of a narrow conscious focus when I'm looking out at an experience after it's gone through my thought process. If I make a conscious point, I can kind of change my angle to see these positives, but for the most part, my natural looking forward angle is to look through these negatives to see the positives. And that just changes the whole way I experience things. If I actively make a point to switch that process around, to say, yeah, it's really hot out, but I'm having a good time, it's so much easier for me to see those positives and to enjoy them. And that helps me kind of drown out the negatives or better live with them. It's not that I'm trying to entirely ignore them, it's just that I'm prioritizing where my perspective is coming from. And that's a huge change for me. The other example I would go over is kind of this YouTube channel where, whenever I think to go make a video or, begin to take that step, my initial thinking is I really enjoy making these videos. It's fulfilling for me. It's therapeutic in a lot of ways. It's helping me to, consciously think about things in a more concrete way that can be articulated to someone else and then back to me. But then the negatives are like, not a lot of people watch it. People probably don't care. The whole negative thought process that I've talked about in previous videos starts to manifest itself. And that becomes the perspective I have to look through to see those positives. From that perspective, it's so much harder to find the motivation and energy to take action to make these videos. If I make a conscious effort to flip that around to say, not a lot of people are watching these videos. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're not great. The whole whatever it is, whatever that ends up being. If I make a conscious effort to think of that stuff first and then focus on the positives of, but I really enjoy making them. They're really helpful for me. Hopefully they're helpful to someone else. If I get to help one person with this video, that's great. It is so much better to have that perspective be the primary focus. It makes it that much easier to stay within this conscious realm, to look out at the experience through a positive light. Sure, if I make the active choice to change my perspective, I can see these negatives if I really wanted to, but it's so much easier and so much better to just get the negatives out of the way and then kind of look at the experience through the positives. When I look at it like this, it's so much easier for me to find the energy and drive to make these videos. So I hope in having explained this, I can show why this is such an important realization to me and how impactful it could possibly be on my life overall. If I make a conscious effort to first allow negative thoughts come up about an experience and then focus on the positives, it becomes that much more easy and simplistic to look at that experience through a positive lens and prioritize looking at it that way. This is also really helpful in journaling. Like if I go to write about an experience, it's really helpful for me to allow myself to think about the negatives of something first and then the positives after. Being left with that positive thought on something allows me to view the experience in a much better light. It's really been helpful for me. But one thing I'm curious about is how many other people have their filter on backwards? Am I just some anomaly? Or have you thought about it at all? Like, how is your filter configured? Do you think about negatives first and then positives, or the other way around? I'd be really curious to hear what you think and if this realization could potentially help you or, gives you something to think about as well. But yeah, that about wraps it up. I really want to hear what you guys think. I appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out. My name is Albert. This has been On to Something, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.